Good morning, brothers and sisters. Today, as our Presidium of the Legion of Mary marks and honors the birthday of the Blessed Virgin Mary, I'm really very pleased to have been invited to give a talk on Our Lady. It is obviously fitting to talk about her birthday, so I'm going to do that. I would like to begin with a reading of the gospel that was used on September 8th. So would you please stand for the reading of the gospel? The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham became the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah became the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab. Amminadab became the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz became the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed became the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David, the king. David became the father of Solomon, whose mother had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon became the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asaph. Asaph became the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, Joram the father of Uzziah. Uzziah became the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah became the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amos, Amos the father of Josiah. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the Babylonian exile. After the Babylonian exile, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud became the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok became the father of Achim, Achim the father of Eliud, Eliud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar became the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Of her was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. Now this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. When his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found with child through the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her husband, since he was a righteous man, yet unwilling to expose her to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Such was his intention when, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home, for it is through the Holy Spirit that this child has been conceived in her. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Okay, so first of all, happy belated birthday, Blessed Virgin Mary. So first question, just a little factoid is, how do we know that September 8th is the actual day of Mary's birth? Well, the answer is we don't know. Okay, there's no way to know. In the morning prayer in the Liturgy of the Hours for September 8th, if you look through it carefully, the day is referred to as a commemoration of the birth of Our Lady, and that's the best way, I think, to think about it, that September 8th is the day when we commemorate her birth, regardless of when that day actually was. So what happened, rather, is on the 8th of September, way back in the 4th century, a church in Jerusalem was dedicated in honor of Saint Anne, who was, of course, the mother of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And that became the day, the church officials back then decided that would be the day when we mark, commemorate, and celebrate the birth of the Blessed Mother. It's just that simple. And then to figure out the date of the Immaculate Conception, okay, if her birthday is the 8th of September, take it back 9 months to the 8th of December, and you've got that date. But again, the precise date of that occurrence, we don't know for certain either. But of course, the important thing here is not the precise date. Okay, that's immaterial. The key fact, of course, is that Mary was born. Okay, that's the important thing. The exact date is a really small matter. We commemorate her birthday on a day that was chosen. So the birth of Mary is the dawn of our redemption. Her appearance projects a new light all over the human race, a light of purity, a light of grace, and a shining, brilliant looking forward to the great light which will shine on the human race when Christ himself, the light of the world, is born. Mary was preserved from sin in anticipation of Christ's salvific suffering and death. She benefited from something called prevenient grace, literally grace that comes before. We need to remember that God exists outside of time. Okay, God simply is. When, God was asked for a name, he says, I am, because he is the great I am. Okay, God simply is. And everything that happens throughout history is happening for him in a kind of eternal now. Okay, we humans live in time. We live embedded in history, and so events spool out before us in succession. But not so for God. And so the fact that the crucifixion occurred in human terms several decades after the birth of Mary does in no way prevent the graces of the crucifixion from being applied to her in the Immaculate Conception. For God, nothing will be impossible, to quote Gabriel at the Annunciation, prevenient grace. That's what she received at conception, and that's what she brought into the world at her birth. Now, with the exception of the birth of Christ, no other birth was so important in the eyes of God or so fruitful for the human race. And yet, Our Lady's birth remains in complete obscurity. You know what the real message is for the birth of the Blessed Virgin Mary is that God acts through the most ordinary, everyday things. He works almost exclusively through hidden, obscure, and ordinary things. Of course, he can work spectacular things as he wills, and we know that he's done so. He can and has performed mighty miracles. We know he spectacularly divided the Red Sea like a wall. When I was a child, my mother took me to see the movie The Ten Commandments when it was first released back in the 50s, and Charlton Heston spreads his arms and says, "Behold the immense power of God," and the Red Sea parts. It was a great moment. We know that. A wall to the right and left to give the children of Israel a safe escape from the pursuing Egyptians. And as soon as they were through and the Egyptians were there, their chariots got caught in the mud and the sea closed over them, we know. He made fire come down from heaven to consume his enemies like he did at Sodom and Gomorrah. Even in relatively more recent times, there are some of them as well, if we know where to look. In 1571, at the Battle of Lepanto, which was one of the most important battles in the history of Christianity, a huge Islamic fleet from Turkey, from the Ottoman Empire, was sailing against a Christian fleet. This was off the port of Lepanto in what is today Greece, Albania, Corfu, kind of in that area. And it was, like I said, a battle that was critical in deciding the fate of Christian Europe. Just before that battle began, there was a powerful wind behind the sails of the Turks. This was going to be a battle at sea. And they were being driven forward toward the Christians. It would have brought them victory. And then, if you read this book called The Galleys at Lepanto, it's a great read. It's worth reading. Just as the engagement was beginning, the wind reversed 180 degrees, okay? And suddenly the Christian fleet has the wind to its back, pushing them forward onto victory, okay? A mighty miracle, perhaps not as spectacular as that at the parting of the Red Sea or the fire, but nonetheless a mighty miracle. It brought victory to the Christians. It sustained Europe as a Christian stronghold. The battle was that important, and it was a mighty miracle about 450 years ago. So God can work mighty miracles, but usually he doesn't. Ordinarily, and really almost always, God works through very ordinary things and through the unexpected. Consider the selection of David to be king of Israel. God sent the prophet to Jesse. He sent Samuel to Jesse to select a king from among Jesse's sons. And Jesse, glad to oblige, we know, paraded 9 of his 10 sons, all of his sons except one. Great strapping lads, to be sure. Certain Samuel would choose one of them for the kingship. But read in the first book of Samuel very clearly on that. God says to Samuel, don't pick them by outside appearances, okay? Don't consider how tall they are, how strapping they might be, because that's not how God sees them. And so after considering and rejecting all of them, okay, Jesse, when questioned by Samuel, pressed by him, and almost as an afterthought, brought forth David, the youngest, small, humble, a musician who wasn't even thought of to be in the running to be kind of marched past Samuel. He was tending sheep in a distant field, and David was the one. Or consider briefly the great prophet Amos, chosen from human origins, from humble origins, I should say. He was an arborist, a dresser of sycamores. When the prophet Elijah, in the 19th chapter of the first book of Kings, sought God, remember, he went to a mountaintop and tried to find God up there, first in a great and powerful wind, then in an earthquake, then in fire. But how did God come to Elijah? In a gentle whisper. That is how God works nearly all of the time, and the Blessed Virgin Mary's birth is great proof of that. With our world in the state which it is in, I think, we perhaps even crave to look for God's dramatic intervention. But most often he works through quiet moments. Okay? When Mary was born, it was, at least up to that point, the most important event in the entire history of the world. Nobody less than the Queen of Heaven and Earth had been born, and nobody knew about it. Not even the Gospels record the date of her birth. On that day, the lives of the great and powerful of the world went on much as they always had. Great Caesar, in his vast palace in Rome, thought he was ruling the whole world, planning his next military move, sending out generals to expand the borders of the empire still farther. In China, where they knew Caesar didn't rule the whole world, a brilliant civilization was flourishing. The same in India. And at the time of the day of the Blessed Virgin Mary, some of the great cities of the Mayans in Central America had been around a long time, been around for centuries. All those supposedly great people thought that what they were doing was so terribly important. But what was really important, brothers and sisters, was something nobody knew about. And that is so often God's way of doing things. In the town of Nazareth, the little Blessed Virgin Mary spent her life as a young girl, doing very ordinary things children did back then, even though she was at that point the most powerful, most important person in the entire world. Nobody knew. Okay, she had no formal education. The only thing she ever learned was what her parents taught her at home, what she heard read in the synagogue on Sabbath day. Her days would have been filled with very ordinary, mundane things: cooking, cleaning, perhaps drawing water from the well, carrying it home as she got older. But was God ever at work here? Just as he always is in the most ordinary things. On the feast of the birth of the Virgin Mary, we celebrated just this past Thursday, the 8th of September, the priest or deacon who proclaims the gospel has 2 options from which to read. There's the long form that includes this whole huge genealogy of Jesus, and then a brief account at the end with the account of how the birth of Jesus came about, a short little coda, if you will, tacked on to the end of it. You're given the option. You can read the whole genealogy plus the ending on the birth of Jesus, or you can simply drop the genealogy and just read the short form, which omits the genealogy altogether. When we hear this gospel with this long list of almost unpronounceable, at sometimes Old Testament names proclaimed at various other times during the liturgical year, I think we hear it at the start of Advent, we might see it almost as a kind of throwaway gospel. It's easy to draw that conclusion, something without any real message. But we know that the gospel has hidden depths, and this one is no difference. And when it's read at the birth of the Blessed Virgin Mary, it has this message in it, and the message is that God works through very ordinary things. Now, we know the names of some of the people on that list, certainly. There's some good people on that list. You know, there are a few dreadful people on the list. One of them is a king who literally had a prophet he disliked stuffed into a hollow tree and then had the tree cut down with the prophet in the middle of it, okay? There are other people of questionable virtue on that list, but that's not the point. That's not used. That's not the point I want to pick out today, okay? The point I want to pick out today is that so many of the names in that gospel are completely lost to history. Nobody knows who many of those people were. Nobody knows what they did. And yet, wasn't God continuously at work in all of them? All their lives, all their events from cradle to grave have been completely lost for many of those people, just like the writing on an old tombstone. I grew up in New England where they had these old cemeteries that the Puritan fathers had planted, and sometimes you couldn't read the word, sometimes you couldn't even read the name of the person whose remains rested there. And yet God was continually at work. And the message to keep in mind is that he is still at work today in the most ordinary things. In the Gospels, the figure of Mary is completely overshadowed by that of her divine Son. The evangelists tell us only what is necessary to present the mother of the Redeemer. And in fact, she enters on the scene only when the gospel narrative of the incarnation of the Word begins. Mary's life is lost in so many ways in the life of Jesus, and she would have had it no other way. She lived in obscurity, not only during the years of her childhood, but during almost the whole of Jesus' public life, surfacing only occasionally and rarely, and at the most critical times. There was someone back in the 60s, I think it was Andy Warhol, said that in the future everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. Well, we know that isn't true. Even with the potential of social media, no one gains world fame for 15 minutes, and probably likely never will happen. Most of us never do anything that the world takes notice of for any great length of time. Most of our lives are spent in complete obscurity, and it doesn't matter. Because what matters, my friends, is what's important to God. What's important to God are love, our acts of forgiveness, acts of charity, kindness, generosity, trust in his providence. In fact, it's almost axiomatic, it's almost expected saying that the more the world pays attention to any given event, the less important it actually is, right? What are the things the world likes to pay attention to? Some actor or actress has just gotten one more award in Hollywood. You watch TV, the networks see all of these. There seems to be some kind of Stars Award show for almost everything. There's so many of them anymore. What does it matter? Some sports star just achieved some very noteworthy athletic record. Really, who cares? Okay, it couldn't be less important because what matters is what matters to God. I'm telling you that almost all the time it's in silence, it's in hiddenness that God acts. No one takes any notice of it, but God knows and God cares. And in that department, the Blessed Virgin Mary is the greatest one who ever lived. The greatest one who ever lived. St. Bonaventure once said this. He said, God could have made a better world than the world he made, but he could not have made a better mother for Jesus Christ. He could have made a world with brighter sunlight, with more fragrant flowers. He could have done all that, but he could not have made a better mother than the mother of Jesus Christ. She was perfect in charity. If you read what's recorded in St. Alphonsus Liguori, his Glories of Mary, which I commend to you, there's plenty of evidence that he cites that her holiness surpasses that of all of the angels and saints combined. She is our friend. She is our supporter. She acts in our favor. We have her as a friend in the highest of high places. There's some history says that when she was born, the people of Israel were beginning to lose hope that the Messiah would ever come. Please don't let that happen to any of you here today. Remember, God works through ordinary things at all times. Feast of Mary is an invitation to the hidden life, to hide ourselves with Christ in Mary and with Christ in God. Let's ask for the help of the Blessed Virgin Mary today. Holy Mary, our hope, seat of wisdom, pray for us. Thank you.